An adage has always stuck with me. Make small beautiful things until you can make big beautiful things. I like that and wanted to share some moments when filmmakers did something small and beautiful. Die Hard has an incredibly efficient and fun script. Memorable performances everywhere and some really cool sequence concepts that basically made every blockbuster action movie after it create themselves in its image. But I rarely hear anything about the visual style of Die Hard, and there's plenty to talk about. The director of Die Hard, John McTiernan, gets that his movies need a certain standard and consistency of speed and movement. In his words,
"Did you notice that every one of those shots started with a dolly and leading into that elevator shot? But more than that, it also starts with a dolly move that's sympathetic with the dolly moves that preceded it. Part of the sense of camera movement that I was working on here, I do it less self-consciously now, but I still try to do the same thing, is your own eyes move around constantly. And there's just things about a picture that lead you to the next picture, and your eyes move there. And if you set it up right with a camera, you don't have to cut. The audience's eyes want to go with you to wherever the camera move is going.
McTiernan is big about seeing movies as a linear experience. One shot strings to the next in an emotionally resonant way. This wasn't always the case in Hollywood. Before the auteurs and the French New Wave influence in America, cuts served a functional purpose. Cutting for action was prevalent because it makes the linear experience smooth. In that 1/24th of a second, your eye picks up some flash of movement in one shot, and your brain stitches it to the movement of the second shot. It's continuous, and the cut feels clean. McTiernan wanted to move camera even if it wasn't motivated by plot or thought. He wanted to do a very European thing. Predator, Die Hard, Kindergarten Cop. These movies pulled from Truffaut, Antonioni, Godard. This is why he hired Jan de Bont as DP for his work on Fourth Man. So you have these emotionally resonant dolly speeds that aren't necessarily conducive to the pacing in the narrative. Well, McTiernan manufactures speed by whipping camera here and there, but in order to maintain geography, he's wonderfully aware of lines. And this is where I think it gets good. Here's some Die Hard shots, but let's focus on diagonal lines. In a 2D space, lines can be only three things really: up, down, left, right, and angled. In film school, I had a professor named Bruce Bloch. Bloch wrote a book called The Visual Story, and in it, he covers visual motifs. He made us take frames of movies and draw them as simple diagrams of lines, basically simplifying frames to only the strongest and most eye-provoking lines. The first thing he teaches you is a concept called deep space, which is the illusion of depth through specific depth cues. In other words, in your 2D canvas, how do you create the feeling of distance and imply the invisible z-axis? You'll remember your first art class taught you vanishing point. You pick a point in your frame and draw diagonal lines to that point. This creates 1, 2, or 3 point perspectives. Live action and motion directors can do some more things to imply a 3D space. If you start moving things on the z-axis of camera, you can create a depth cue through scale discrepancies, or even in some cases force impossible scenarios to seem completely natural. There are other type of films that use horizontal and vertical lines as their bread and butter. Bloch called those flat space films. Think Wes Anderson. He has a strong affinity for flattening the image and portraying his world on a plane parallel to camera. It's impressive since he avoids telephoto lenses as well, which would exaggerate the flatness of his angles. In other words, he uses set decoration and lateral movement to flatten his worlds. Today I want to talk about how McTiernan uses both deep space and flat space to differentiate beats of rests and beats of speed. Let's take a look at what McTiernan does when he wants to show us rest or stasis. We see McClane against a backdrop of horizontal and vertical lines at the beginning of the film. We see Argyle, the limo driver who for most of Act 2 is unaware of the situation upstairs, flatly presented in his own bubble. Both sound and picture do this by containing his world just to the limo. After a brief moment of introspection after the first flurry of action sequences, McClane looks outside in a voyeuristic rear window-esque shot towards an up-down landscape of the indifferent and unaware exterior. These brief breaks from the action remind us of the world outside, where the need for movement and speed are non-existent. In The Calm Before the Death of Takagi, McTiernan starts the sequence with waiting in an elevator. It shows Han's cool, collected demeanor that will soon juxtapose this ruthless violence. Even other characters bring this horizontal-vertical motif into the plaza. With Al, before he knows what's going on, his background is reminiscent of McClane's at the airport. In Die Hard, McTiernan ramps up the diagonals when John McClane needs to traverse spaces and move through the maze that is Nakatomi Plaza. Diagonals shout, "Look here, here's the way to the next sequence." McClane needs to constantly be in motion to navigate around Gruber's lackeys. McTiernan trains us to see when he's stuck and where he should go. We're watching a 40-second sequence at the beginning of the hostile takeover, and McTiernan starts to connect the dots. Diagonals start drawing our eye in specific directions along with the whip hands that tie the geography together. We look to the thieves, to the exit, and directionally where he needs to go to escape detection. And again, he does it 3 minutes later when he needs to find a second spot to hide, using the stairs and their directionality as basically a map to where to go. Here's a case where McClane's back is against the ground as a thug walks on the table. We follow the zigzag until McClane shoots him from under the table, again up and down. Even the goon's background is distorted by lensing and rotation. At one point, McClane is surprised on the roof by Gruber's men. This sequence uses diagonals to lead us to Carl, the main threat, the stairwells, which will soon be populated by Gruber's men, and the elevator shaft that tells us the only way out is down. It's just a simple vanishing point in this case, but it's very effective. And it all culminates in one of the most famous shots in all of, movies, I guess. The sequence is all about moving camera and keeping the momentum, but it's tempered. It's all about propelling us forward on a line. A quote from McTiernan: "Film is really sort of a chain that's really linear, yet when it's all strung together, it just sort of feels like an experience. It takes quite a while to be able to deconstruct that experience to figure out what you really saw." The key here is maintaining screen direction for clarity and destroying it for chaos. Knowing when you need to keep it intact is the hallmark of a good director, and knowing when you can ditch it for other purposes is the sign of a great one. I'll leave you with an example of how McTiernan is precious even with eyelines. In this sequence where Hans and John are speaking over the walkies, McTiernan maintains screen direction as if they're in the same room, because dramatically, they are. This beat is proof of the cost of McClane's intervention, culminating in the death of Ellis. McTiernan even blocks Willis to move when the walkies pass to Ellis, so the eye lines between the cuts are always maintained. And as an added garnish, when Ellis is shot, the crowd outside, despite us not knowing the relative geography of the room and the lobby, keeps the screen direction continuous. This is one of the reasons you don't think about it, and you just enjoy it. So go watch Die Hard again, and maybe look at these systems. Playing tricks like this are basically what a director brings to the visual tapestry of a movie. This is all dumb make-em-ups anyway, but guiding the audience cleanly through the journey of a protagonist and signaling to us visual cues of things like safety and danger are all just tools for entertainment. I mean, why the hell does he care about lines so much? I don't know. It's stupid. But I noticed it, and it's taught in schools. I fucking love it. God damn it, it's beautiful.